Hello everyone, it's Parisha from The Artistic Scroll. So in today's tutorial we're going to learn how to draw this beautiful magical dragon fan in Procreate. But before we get started, here's what you'll need. Your iPad and pencil, the Procreate app, and the sketch file and color palette for the tutorial, which you can download for free from my vault of free resources, the Artistic Archive. The link is in the description below, so please go over there, download the files, and I'll see you in the tutorial. So when you download your canvas, this is exactly what it's going to look like. We've already got the sketch downloaded on the first layer, and we'll be able to see it a bit clearer once we've filled in the background. So let's do that. Just tap on this colors menu here, and then select the dragon fan menu and then set it as default. So we're going to move this color palette menu to the left now, so that we've got space for all our layers eventually. Now change this background color by tapping on the background, and voila, you can see your sketch now. Great. So we just need to reduce the opacity of the sketch layer a little bit so we can sort of start drawing on it. Now our whole idea is to be able to draw the fan by creating a symmetry in the center and then replicating one side on the other side. So create a new layer and let's move it onto the sketch layer. And then let's go to the Actions menu and pick the Canvas tab. Turn on the Drawing Guide and click on Edit Drawing Guide. So you'll be able to pick the Symmetry option and make sure you select Vertical here. So symmetry works in this way. This blue dot is responsible for the position of the symmetry and the green one for the rotation or the axis. So all we've got to do now is just try and align this blue dot with the central vein of the fan. And once we've done that, we can try and use the green dot to rotate it into position so that it perfectly aligns with the central vein of the fan, because that's what we're going to be using as our point of symmetry, so that we draw on just one side of the fan and it gets replicated on the other side. And once you're happy with that, just tap on Done, and then we can start drawing on one side. So make sure that Drawing Assist is switched on for our layer 2. And then we're going to select this red color. And in inking, let's select the technical pen brush. So our task is to now start drawing in the fan. And as you can see, it's all getting drawn on the other side as well, so it's quite a bit of a time saver. Also, because it's symmetrical, you've got the exact dimensions there, so it's quite useful. Great, now you can just fill it in. Perfect. Now you've got this teardrop pattern here, and what we want to do is just erase this teardrop pattern. So basically just select the technical pen brush again as an eraser this time, and then go ahead and erase this pattern in the fan layer. Okay, that looks pretty good. But I think we've just missed one spot here, so let's go with that. And perfect. Alright, so now we're going to be creating this orange pattern on the fan. So create a new layer and tap on Clipping Mask to turn on the Clipping Mask. And then we're going to select this orange color. And again, with Drawing Assist on this time. Let's start drawing in the patterns. Now you can see how much time we're saving by having the drawing assistant symmetry on. Otherwise we'll be having to draw everything ourselves. Now make sure that you close the shape before you fill it in. Perfect. You can draw straight lines by just, trying to draw a line first and then not lifting off your pencil off the screen. So once you keep it stuck to the screen for a second, depending on how much time duration you've set in your preferences, it will automatically become a straight line. So that's like one of the cool features of Procreate, so you can make use of that a lot. You can see how the lines are setting in no matter how uneven they are in the beginning. Now let's draw this teardrop pattern on the fan as well. And just draw them out first. We'll be filling them in a second. Great, so that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to fill in one and then tap on continue filling on the blue little menu that you see up there. And once you're done with that, just tap on color drop stop, and that's it. And you can refine the shapes if you want. And then let's just finish up with this lower pattern there, or pattern on the lower end of the fan. Okay, that looks great. So now let's add some shadows to the fan, along the creases basically. So create a new clipping mask this time. And we're not going to have drawing assist on. Now just change the blend mode of this layer to multiply, and this will basically just create shadows using the same colors that we have. So select the same red color and then draw a line right along the crease of the fan. And make sure that you also close this shape. Now this shape, that whatever that we're drawing, is where our shadow is going to be. And the one right next to it will be our highlight. So we can just leave that. But we just need to create the shapes for our shadows. So let's go ahead and do that. And we'll be filling them all in a second. You'll see exactly what I mean by these. Maybe this will help a bit to delineate which ones are the ones that we'll be filling in. Because it can get a bit confusing, especially when they're so close to each other here. Okay, great. Now it's time to start filling them all. So fill one and then tap on continue filling to fill all of them. Once you're done with that, we can reduce the opacity of this layer to about 50%. And as you can see, it looks like a folded fan now, exactly the effect we wanted to go for. So we can turn off the drawing guide. We're almost done with the fan. But we just have to add in some of these spokes now. So we've got to create a new layer. And we'll try and create this new layer under the fan layer. So move it under there. And then with the same orange color and the technical pen brush, you can reduce the size of the brush a bit. Let's just draw some spokes. For even more detailed approach to this, just make sure that the spokes are aligning with the fold of the fan. They're either just above or behind the crease, so that it looks like the creases are actually on the spokes. Remember, the fun is all in the details in illustration. Looks good. Now it's time to draw the handles. So we're going to create a new layer on top of the fan layer now. So once again, with the technical pen brush and the same orange color, it's time to draw in the handles. And now you can fill them in. Looks good. Now it's time to draw in these tassels. So we're going to create a new layer under the spokes layer. And then we're going to select this red color. And then again with the same brush, go ahead and outline the tassels and then draw them in. And with the lower end of the tassel, you can just have some stray strings coming out as an effect. And then with this orange color again, just draw in the beads. But remember, because they're on the same layer, if you try and color fill them, they will fill the entire tassel. So we just want to be able to ink in the color instead of trying to use color fill for this. Okay, that looks great. Now we can just go ahead and group all of these fan layers together. Firstly, just group the fan itself. And then we can eventually group these later on as well. But right now, let's just add in all of the colors first. So we're going to get started with the dragon. So use this lighter orange color, or yellow in fact, let's call it yellow. Use this lighter yellow color and then paint in the body. So we're going to be drawing in the dragon in different parts just to keep everything easier to tackle, because it's quite a big part of the illustration and there's lots of layers and clipping masks that we'll be needing to handle. So right now we're just going to concentrate on the body and then we'll move on to the flames and everything else. So just outline everything and then later on we'll fill it all in. One thing to keep in mind is that because this dragon body will be above the fan layer, just this little edge that we've got very close to the fan, we just need to be a bit careful about inking that in. So just to prevent this from happening, let's go back to the fan layer and then select it and then press invert. So you can see that the fan layer has been excluded from whatever we're going to draw next. So return to your dragon body layer and then start drawing comfortably. Now you can see that whatever we draw, no matter what, it's not going to affect the fan layer because we've inverted the selection in a way. So let's do that, and then remember to fill in these little holes as well where we're expecting the body to be behind the fan. So yep, like I mentioned, attention is in all the details, so remember that. For illustration, don't miss out on these because then it'll look a bit unnatural. So fill in all of these as an outline. Make sure you've left no spaces. Then once you're done, just remember that we'll be filling it in a bit because there is a bit of the dragon on the fan as well, because if you try and do a colorful now, it's going to come on top of that too. It's as in that, sorry. The dragon part on top of the fan won't get filled, so we'll do that in a minute. So till then, just try and outline whatever is already there outside the fan. So like I mentioned there, you can't really draw anything there on top of the fan yet, so just draw whatever's behind it for now. And then once you've turned off the selection, that's when you can start drawing on top of it. And then when you're done, just color fill all of these. Just make any changes, any refinements that you need to make. Make sure that all the curves are smooth. And there you go. So the body is ready now. The next part that we're going to handle is the face, basically, or the head flames. So let's use this darker yellow. And then with the same brush, start drawing in the head flames. You can leave the horns of the dragon right now. That'll be on a separate layer, so just concentrate on the head flames. The horns will be on another layer on top of this. And just make sure that the ends of the flames are a little pointed as well. Gives a nice effect. So fill it all in. And then we're also going to draw the eyes of the dragon, as well as the nose and these curly whiskers of the dragon too, on the same layer. Yeah, I'm having real struggle with this one. Remember, it's always trial and error. And then also draw in this little part of the head flame on the lower end too. Okay, looks good. Now it's time for the horns. So create a new layer on top of the head flames layer. And then we'll go back to this lighter yellow color. And with the same technical pen brush, draw in the horns. Okay, looks great. Now, for the last part, we're going to be drawing in the flames. No, that's not the last part actually, it's the second last. The last one will be the tail flames. So right now we're going to go back to our body flame, sorry. So go back to the body layer, create a new layer on top of the body layer. And then going back to this darker yellow color, or almost orange, start outlining the flames on the body. And close the shape and then fill it all in. Great, let's move on to the other side now. And once you're done, fill it all in. That looks great. Now it's time for the tail flames, so create a new layer on top of the body flames. And let's go ahead and outline the tail flames and then fill it all in. You can do this tail flame layer behind the body layer as well, just to make things a little bit easier for yourself. I haven't done that, I've just gone ahead and outlined it completely here on top of the body layer. But if you don't want to be outlining it completely, you can also do it in such a way that you move the tail flames behind the body, but still over the fan layer. That looks great. Now it's time to draw in the clouds. So using this purple color, we're going to create a new layer below the fan layer. So even below the tassels, let's just move this layer below that. And then let's get started with the outlining of the clouds. And then when we're filling it, also remember to paint in the cloud's background wherever is required in the teardrop pattern of the fan too. And we're done with all the flat colors. That looks great. So let's get started with adding more details, starting with the handles first. So go to the handles layer, create a new clipping mask on top of that, and change the blend mode to multiply. We'll be adding some shadows first. So let's go ahead and just select the same color as the handles, which was the dark orange, using the eyedropper tool, which is just pressing on the color, and then that color automatically becomes your active color. And we're still using our technical pen brush here, so just go ahead and draw a line at the lower end of the handle and then fill it in. And remember to have your sketch back on so you can see where the top handle ends, and then try and curve the shadow a little bit on both the ends so that you get more of an impression of a 3D object than a straight one. Straight 2D object, I mean. And then repeat the same thing for the other handle. So yeah, remember to just curve it at the end. And then for this lower end, just create a shadow on the lower end of this spokes collection. And then you can either be very specific and add in exactly the same number of lines there as the spokes themselves, or you can just play around and just add them as many as you want, but still a bit realistically. Looks great. Just reduce the opacity now to about 60%, and then create another clipping mask on top, and this time we're going to add some highlights with the blend mode add. Using the same technical pen brush, you can increase the size a little bit, and then on the other side of the shadows we're going to create some highlights. Once again, remember to curve it. And now we're just going to go back to the shadow layer, select it, and then tap on invert to make sure that we don't draw on top of the shadows. So returning to our highlights layer, to start highlighting the opposite ends of our spokes on the handle, I mean. Okay, so remove the selection and then reduce the opacity to about 40%. That looks much better. Now it's time to do the same for our tassels. Now before we do that, just go ahead and group all of these handles layers together and then rename the group as handles. So create a new clipping mask on top of the tassels layer and change the blend mode to multiply. And then again, with the same colors as the tassels themselves, we're going to be adding in some shadows. So firstly, let's just create some shadows of the handles themselves on the tassels. And then we're just going to turn off the sketch layer because it's a bit difficult to see exactly what we're trying to do. Just make sure that the shadows are also consistent throughout the illustration, so determine where your light source is coming from and then create shadows on the opposite side. So create some shadows of the beads on the tassels themselves. And then varying the pressure of the brush on the screen, you can create different thickness shadows on the tassel ends. This is where the Apple Pencil comes in quite handy because it's got pressure sensitivity and you can use that to your advantage here. Now just pick this orange color for the beads shadow. And I'm going to just create a little bit of like a C shape following the shadow of the bead. Okay, now create a new clipping mask on top of that and it's time for the highlights. So just a little dot on the bead, that gives it a nice cute little highlight. And then again, using the red color, we can add some highlights on the tassels too. You don't have to be ultra precise to get an exact C-shaped sort of tassel highlight there. And you don't even have to put in highlights on every opposite end of the shadows there on the tassel ends. Just wherever you think would look nice and you want to emphasize as the highlight, you can do that. You can even add in some new ones. And then just reduce the opacity of the highlights a bit. They're a bit too bright. So around 40%, and that looks good. Great stuff! Now just group all of these layers together and rename that group as tassels. So it looks like that all of our fan is ready, so we can group all the fan layers together now and just rename that group as fans. Great! It's time to tackle the dragon now. So create a new clipping mask to the horns layer and then change the blend mode to multiply. We're going to add some shadows to the horns. So select the same color as the horns and then determine where our light source is coming from here for the dragon. And then on the opposite end, just draw the shadows. And then create a new clipping mask on top, change the blend mode to add, and then create the highlights. And then reduce the opacity of the highlights to about 40%. Okay. Now it's time for the head flames. So just group all of the horns layers together and rename that group as horns. And then we'll get started with the head flames layer now. create a new clipping mask on top and change the blend mode to multiply. Now pick the same color as the head flames and start creating the shadows. We've still got the technical pen brush selected. So for the head flames, we just need to delineate the individual flames as such. So you can follow the same way that I'm doing here and start creating all of these shadows at the lower ends of the head flames. Remember to add in the shadows for the eyes as well. This time the eye shadows are going to be on the top part of the eye. And then we also want to have a little bit of a shadow of the face on the lower head flames. And just a little bit of a dab there for the nose as well. Okay, looks great. Now just reduce the opacity slightly to about 80%. And we're going to add some highlights on top of this. So change the blend mode of the new clipping mask to add. And then like we did for our shadows, we're going to now create these highlights on the other end. So select the shadows, tap invert to clear our area for the highlights, and then start drawing in the highlights with the technical pen brush. And we'll just add some highlights to these curly whiskers as well. Gives a bit more of a dimension, especially to the whisker part on top of the face, because that'll help us to delineate it a bit from the face too. Okay, looks good. So remove the selection now and then reduce the opacity again to about 40%. That looks good. You can check it again by removing the sketch and then refining any curves or things that you want to for the highlights or the shadows. Now group all of these together and then rename this group as Head Flames. Perfect. Now it's time to tackle the tail flames. So create a new clipping mask on top of the tail flames layer. Change the blend mode to multiply, and we're going to add in some shadows firstly to the tail flames. Now, especially in this tail flame area, you can be a little loose with your shadows in a way, so that they can extend a bit beyond just the margins themselves, so that you can add a little bit more depth and variety to the tail flame. So you can follow what I'm doing, and we'll be doing even more variations with the highlights on the tail flame. So just you can practice with what I'm doing right now. Just add a little bit more depth on the lower end of the tail flame. Looks good. Reduce the opacity to somewhere around 80% or even more, 70%. And then add a new clipping mask on top and change the blend mode to add. And now we're just going to add in a lot of variations here for our highlights, because as you can see, we've got a large area for the tail flame. So we can actually just go ahead and do more than just create a little bit of a highlight. So once again, just select and invert the shadows so that we don't draw our highlights on top of them, and then return to your highlights layer and then start drawing your highlights. So as you can see, I'm filling in the space in the orange background of the tail flame with the highlights. And you can even try and connect all of these highlights together as I am. Not necessarily, you don't have to, but it might add a little bit more to it so that it looks like all of this brightness is coming from one source. And then turn off the selection and reduce the opacity to around 40%. Don't worry about the brightness too much right now. We can adjust it a bit later as well, but if you want, you can play around with the tail brightness a bit. I've kept it to 40%. We'll be doing some more glowing work around it afterwards. So group all of these layers together and name that group as tail flames. Now create a new clipping mask on top of the body flames layer, and we're going to repeat the process of adding shadows and highlights to it. So change the blend mode of this clipping mask to multiply, and then repeat the same steps for it. There's a little bit of a flame there that I haven't drawn, so I'm just going to go ahead and add in that. And perhaps make the body a bit more congruent there too. Now go ahead and add in all the shadows. Now just repeat drawing those shadows on the other side of the dragon too. Okay, so now just reduce the opacity of this shadows layer to around 70%, And then you know what it's time for? It's time for highlights. So add in a new clipping mask and then change the blend mode to add. And now we're going to be drawing the highlights on the other side. So once again, select and invert the shadows, return to your highlights layer. And now let's just start adding on of the highlights. Again, we're going to use the same approach as we did with the tail flames, where we not only outlined the highlights, but also created some more highlights in the center of the flames. Now repeat this process on the other side of the dragon too. Okay, that looks lovely. Right, so remove the selection now and then reduce the opacity again to around 40%. And yeah, that looks great. Group all of the body flames layers together and then rename that group as body flames. You can see how much easier it is to access all of these layers because we've got groups there. So now it's time to add in some scales to our dragon. So create a new clipping mask to the body this time and change the blend mode to multiply. But before we go ahead with the scales as such, I just want to add some shadows to the body itself. So we'll go ahead and do that with the same technical pen brush. And then add in some shadows to the lower end of the face. And then to the body itself. Just clean up the shadows a little bit so that they don't fall onto the legs of the dragon. And then add in some shadows to the claws as well. The feet and the claws. This is where you can basically delineate the toes and the claws of the dragon quite easily with the help of shadows. Okay, so that's our shadows done. That looks great. We're just going to blur up these shadows a little bit though. So go to Gaussian Blur in the adjustments panel and apply 5% of blurring. And then let's just duplicate this shadows layer because it seems a bit too faint right now. So go ahead and duplicate this layer. And then select the top of the duplicated layer. And then we're just going to reduce the opacity of this to somewhere around 40%. That looks much better. We've got a nice gradient for the shadow too. So yeah, perhaps we can just blur it up a bit more. So about 3%. Yeah, 3%. Okay, we can probably just define the shadows a little bit more later on, but it's time for some highlights right now. So create a new clipping mask and change the blend mode to add. I'm just going back to the duplicated shadows layer and then reducing the opacity of the lower layer a bit. So return to our highlights layer, and then now it's time to just start drawing in the highlights. Okay, so these look pretty good now. We're probably done with all of our highlights, so let's just reduce the opacity again to around 40%. And yeah, you know the process, we're going to blur this up again, so just about 3%, 2 to 3%. And then duplicate this layer as well. And then this time select the lower duplicated layer and then blur that again. Just about 5%. You can see we've got a nice gradient this way. You've got a darker highlight layer on top and a lower highlight layer which has been blurred some more. So I'm just going to go ahead and define the shadows a little bit more, something which I talked about earlier. So you can use the same technical pen brush and define your shadows, especially where it comes to the feet of the dragon and you really need to be able to differentiate the claws there. Okay, that's looking pretty smooth now. So create a new layer on top of the highlights layer, change that into a clipping mask, and then change the blend mode to add. And this time, we're going to be adding in all of our scales. So we've got the same technical pen brush selected, and then using the lighter yellow color, just draw in the scales. Great! Now we're going to reduce the opacity again to around 30% and then select these highlights and tap on invert. This time we're going to be creating shadows where the highlights are not obstructing them. So change the blend mode of a new clipping mask below the highlights layer to multiply and draw the shadows of the scales now. Great, so remove the selection now and then reduce the opacity of this layer to about 70%. And now that we're almost done with the dragon, just group all of the body layers together and then rename that group as body. Great! It's time to work on the clouds now. So create a new clipping mask to the clouds layer and then change the blend mode to add. We're going to start with the highlights first, obviously, with the add mode. So select the same purple color and then with the technical pen brush, go ahead and outline and fill in some of these swirlies, the swirling patterns on the clouds. That looks great. Now reduce the opacity of the highlights layer to around 20%. And you know what comes next? It's shadows. So we're going to select these highlights layer first, tap on invert, and then create a new clipping mask below this below the highlights clipping mask layer. So change the blend mode of this new clipping mask to multiply, or actually let's change it to linear burn. Linear burn gives us a much darker effect and a slightly more vibrant effect than multiply does. So we're going to make use of that here. So now just create some shadows around the areas that we're trying to draw the highlights, basically. In a way, it might help if you just try and draw them the same way I'm drawing, and then study the pattern, and then perhaps make some changes on your own clouds later if you want. But I've used a very arbitrary way of adding in the shadows to give them a bit more dimension, and also to differentiate the areas of the cloud. So it's really up to you how you want to paint them in. As you can see, I'm trying to create some more variation in the clouds by drawing in the shadows in between the cloud areas too. And we're done with all of the shadows, so remove the selection now. And then reduce the opacity of this layer to around 50%. That looks good. So let's group all of the clouds layers together and then rename this as clouds. Right, so now it's time to add in some glow to the dragon. So return to the body layer of the dragon and then duplicate this layer. Now select the lower of the duplicated layers, change the blend mode of that layer to add. And now we're going to blur this layer up. So go to Gaussian blur in adjustments and then apply a blur of around 5%. And you can see how the body has started to glow up a bit. That's exactly the kind of effect we want for all the layers of the dragon. So next thing, repeat the same thing for the body flames, duplicate it, choose the lower duplicated layer, and then change the blend mode of that to add, and then apply about a 5% Gaussian blur to that layer. And the body flames have lit up now. Repeat this for the tail flames, duplicate the layer, select the lower duplicated layer, change the blend mode to add, go to Gaussian blur, and then apply about a 5% blur there. Okay. And lastly, we're going to go ahead with the head flames. Repeat the same thing, duplicate the layer, change the blend mode of the lower duplicated layer to add, apply a 5% Gaussian blur. That looks gorgeous. We'll do the same thing with the horns layer as well. So duplicate, change the blend mode of the lower duplicated layer to add, and apply a 5% Gaussian blur. Looks beautiful! I love it! Okay, we just need to add in a little bit more of a colored glow behind the fan as such. So go to the clouds group and then create a new layer above that. And then change the blend mode to add. So now we're going to just select this red color and then go back to the brushes menu and then in airbrushing select the soft brush right on top. And now starting from the center, you can change the brush size a bit, draw in a little bit of a circle there. You've got a beautiful glow, as you can see. It's going on to the clouds as well, and you can even highlight some areas on the clouds a little bit some more. Just like that. You see how it's all looking nice and magical now. So now it's time to apply some Gaussian blur to our glow layer as well. So about a 20% blurring. And you can go back to the clouds and just highlight them a little bit more if you feel like you need to. That looks great. But as you can see, we can't really visualize the spokes of the fan too much. So we're just going to reduce the opacity of this glow layer slightly to about 80%. And now you can see the spokes of the fan too. Looks great. It's time for my favorite part of the illustration. We're gonna add some magical dust. So create a new layer right on the top and change the blend mode to add. Go to the brushes section and then select the light pen in the luminance menu, and then using the same red color, draw in some magical dust or glowing fireflies or whatever you want to call them. You can add in these fireflies, dust, wherever you want, just to bring out the effect of magic. And just vary the pressure that you apply on the screen with your pencil to enhance the glow a little bit or to decrease it. And that's it, guys. We are done with this illustration. This was so beautiful. Thank you for joining me in this journey. Make sure to subscribe to my channel if you like the tutorial, and don't forget to get your sketches and palettes from the Artistic Archive. I'll see you in the next one.